Hello everyone. Jer here with Liam again.
Hi.
This time not recording the podcast. Trying something new. We're gonna do a set review. Some of the usual suspects for set reviews were busy and weren't able to do it this time, so we thought we'd step up and take a crack at the Amonkhet set review. Just a little advance warning, I'm feeling a little under the weather, so if you hear sniffling or coughing or potentially blowing my nose, I apologize in advance. Might try to edit it out. Might not. Who knows?
It'll be fine.
Who knows?
Oh, God. So we have the set sort of broken down into 4 different groups: staples, solid playables, like niche or one archetype playable cards, and then like possible inclusions, but we'll be astounded if they do get included. Slash, like, it's probably wrong if they do, but it might happen. Someone might play it.
Could happen.
And ideally, you will be seeing these cards pop up on the screen as we talk about them. We're going to test my video editing prowess here with this one, but I think I can manage it. So the first card we're going to talk about is Ronis.
Ronis the Indomitable.
Yeah.
I've actually been playing this card a lot in Standard. I know, I'm playing Standard again. Gasp! I actually think it's fine.
I keep telling you not to, and he keeps getting dragged back in.
Yeah, it's bound to happen.
I'm playing Standard too.
Yeah, I think this card's really good. The condition is really easy to satisfy.
Yeah.
Like any 2-power creature, and it can turn itself on with its activated ability. It having Death Touch is also relevant, because it like later on, if you're playing against an unfair strategy, you can continue to attack into bigger things like Elish Norn or Grizzlebrand or whatnot, and actually that can be a relevant ability on something. Also, just having an indestructible thing to stick around, especially to jam on turn 3 against control decks after they tap out for whatever.
It does have a couple of weaknesses. Unlike the previous Cycle of Gods, it's a creature all the time. So Path and Swords get it no matter what, but on the plus side, Enchantment Hate doesn't. So it's kind of it's got some advantages and some disadvantages, but all in all, like, pretty powerful card. There's lots of decks that are playing a bunch of 4-power creatures. Like, it's not super difficult to turn this card on as well.
Yeah, and having this card plus, like, Thrun, that's the obvious combo I see, which is, like,
the dream scenario.
It's virtually 2 unkillable threats, and, like, quite often the most lacking attribute Thrun has is it doesn't have trample, so it just gets chump blocked forever, and Ronis, they were basically made for each other.
Yeah, it does solve that problem.
Like, Thrun is an almost non-removable 4-power threat, and Ronis has the ability to give Thrun trample.
So what decks do you think would play this card, sorry?
I think any of the monsters decks, it could get into red-green monsters that has a lot of high-power threats.
I guess the one other thing to note about it is that it's 3 mana, so, like, you can go elf into this card.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy on the mana, only 1 green as well, so it's, like, very easy to cast.
So you think, like, the monsters decks?
Either green-white, Naya, red-green,
Jund, which just won.
Yeah, Jund, exactly. Could potentially see it in any of those style of decks. So it doesn't have, like, an abundance of archetypes you can play it in, because you do want to... Yeah. It does have some deck building requirements, but, like, by and large, the cards you want to put in...
Yeah,
like,
but...
You want efficient, high-powered creatures in those decks anyways.
Yeah. Fits a lot as what a lot of aggressive strategies are trying to do.
Yeah, I actually think it fits the mid-range strategies better than the aggressive strategies.
Sure,
It's also very good with equipment, because you can soup some of your other creatures up, and then it'll satisfy the Ronis condition, and then you can give them trample to connect with your swords or whatnot. So it's
makes sense.
Very good with equipment as well. So I don't think I've seen this card played too much yet, and I think it should see more play than it's getting so far.
Yeah, fair enough. So the next card we have is Glorybringer.
This is probably the best card in the set for Highlander.
It's close, but yeah, it's probably true.
This card is nuts.
Yeah, so this card, like, it's Flame Tongue Kavu and Thundermaw Hellkite some of the time. Or Stormbreath Dragon, sorry, yeah. Like, and it kind of gets to be whichever one you'd prefer.
I think it's better than Stormbreath Dragon.
Yeah, I believe that.
I think the Exert ability is more relevant more often than the monstrous and protection from white.
Yeah, and we've already seen both Jeskai and Blue Moon decks playing this card.
And monsters as well.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
Just so insane. Power. Interesting.
Yeah. Just so insane to get to, like, play this on turn 4 or 5 and just, like, kill, like, a reasonable sized threat. Like, maybe you don't get to kill their biggest thing, but you're killing their second biggest thing at the worst, usually.
Yeah.
And get in for 4, and then, like...
Or kill a planeswalker and kill a creature. Like,
yeah, which is, like, often what it's
like
doing.
a control deck has, like, Thing in the Ice, you have some ground guys, they tap out for Jace, they brainstorm, and then you untap Glorybringer, attack, exert, kill their Thing in the Ice before it gets to block, get in for a bunch of damage with the other creatures, kill their Jace. And they're like, how did this go so wrong?
And I was trying to work out if there are, like, cards that untap permanents that we sort of, like, commonly play in Highlander that kind of combo with the exert mechanic, and I was sort of coming up with a lot of blanks, but it's possible you even want to, like, tune your deck a little bit more to maybe have some of those synergies.
Well, in like, blue-red decks, it goes well with the Splinter Twin.
Yeah, that's
things,
true.
right?
Deceiver, Exarch,
Deceiver, Exarch, Pestermite.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty sick.
So, yeah, this card is clearly good. It's every bit as good as you think it is, probably more.
Yeah.
Slam it as often as possible.
Play it in your 5-mana dragon decks.
If you're playing 5-mana spells, this should probably be one of them.
Yeah. Seems fair.
Next card we want to talk about, Gideon of the Trials. I've played this card a few times already. It's very good. It's can lock combo out of the game.
Yeah, I was about to say, I've been playing combo decks lately, and I'm quite glad I haven't played against this card.
It's very good against aggro, and I've won a game in sort of, like, I was playing my green-white deck that I talked about on the last podcast episode, and played against another mid-rangey deck, and we just ended up trading 1-for-1, except I had this Gideon that was just plussing. Eventually it got to 8, and we were both virtually out of cards, and I just attacked him 5 times with this Gideon and won.
Yeah.
So
makes sense.
It's also, like, a very difficult threat to remove.
So it is double white, right? It is a little color intensive, and as voted by the community, white, the worst color to have as your secondary color in Highlander. So
I think it's the worst primary color. I don't think it's the worst secondary color.
Oh, sorry, yeah, that is what people were
on. Yeah. I think white's a very good secondary color.
Anyway, so it's a little hard to cast, and it doesn't fit in sort of like maybe quite as many archetypes as Glorybringer, but I think this might be the second best card from the set.
I agree. I think it is very, very good. It's good, as I said, in an abundance of archetypes. The planeswalkers that don't actually have ultimates are often very good. Like, they just have 3 usable abilities immediately. Are often the best ones.
Yeah.
And this one has that and only costs 3 mana.
Yeah.
So
you can go elf into this card, which is pretty nuts.
Yep.
Anytime you can go elf into planeswalker, it's like pretty insane.
Yeah. Very good.
The next card we have is Nissa.
Steward of Elements.
I believe you're correct.
First X casting cost planeswalker. I also think this card's really good. I know a bunch of people have been testing it. I've heard mostly positive reviews, I think.
Yep.
Just the flexibility this card gives you. It's a great late game top deck. Early game, it's a great... Once again, going elf into this card is nuts. Setting up your draws. It can ramp you by putting lands into play. Get you ahead on board by putting creatures into play.
And what, like... Pat Berdusco was saying is like this card's just the stone nuts in pod because you play it on turn 2 off of an elf, and then you plus it, and you just have so many hits in your deck to ramp you because not only do you have all these lands, but you also have all these elves, and you even have like Sylvan Ranger, Wood Elves, like all these kinds of cards as well. So you just have like 40 hits in your deck to ramp yourself off of this Nissa that you got to play on turn 2. And then like even if it ramps you once and gains you 3 life, it's already crazy, right? Like it's already been way better than it can be. And if it stays in play after that,
and if it ramps you, it's also like drawing you a card basically because it's putting it off the top of your deck.
Yeah, absolutely. So. No, that card's really good. I did also watch someone like ultimate Nissa more than once on the same turn. They had a bunch of mana and they like ultimated Nissa, bounced it with Venser Shaper Savant, and then replayed Nissa and ultimated Nissa again and attacked someone for lethal.
That's a sick play.
There was a Gaia's Cradle and a lot of creatures in play. It was,
interesting.
It looked like a sick game.
That's the hotness.
It was the hotness.
So watch out for that line of play.
Common. The next card we have is Harsh Mentor. This is just like a very like efficiently costed red threat that's a 2/2, not a 3/1 or a 2/1, which I actually think is actually better for it. It's like not going to get cleaned up by like the back end of incidental removal. Like you actually need to invest a full removal spell into it a lot of the time.
Yeah. And it's a red card, so it's not going to have a ton of toughness. But...
No. But it makes fetch lands cost 3 life. It's just
really
like,
good against Sensei's top.
Yeah, it's very effective against that card. And so it's just like a situation where like this card is usually going to get in for 4 damage, oftentimes more. And the big thing too is that unlike some red creatures which decks get to ignore, you kind of can't ignore this card.
A lot of decks can't.
Yeah,
it's just a card you're going to get incidental value off of in virtually every matchup.
Yeah, like not quite as good as Eidolon of the Great Revel, but more playable than Eidolon of the Great Revel in some ways because it's playable in every deck, or a lot more decks, and it's one-sided.
Exactly. It's non-symmetrical, and the casting cost is much easier on the mana.
Yep.
So you get to play it in red-white. And
yeah.
I actually really like that they're starting to give red some more hate bear type creatures.
Yeah, me too.
I think it's really necessary for, especially in Eternal formats.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm surprised I haven't seen this card in Modern yet. It seems really good in that format.
Where there's like a gazillion fetch lands running around.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not the Modern set review, but I have views on this that I will share to you after we're done.
Excellent.
The next card we're going to talk about is Manglehorn. Jeremy and I actually disagree about this card a little bit. Jeremy thinks it's better than Reclamation Sage. I'm sorry, I'm putting words.
Yeah, most of the time I think it's better than Reclamation Sage. I think it's sort of one of those cards that has a higher ceiling, lower floor. I think obviously sometimes your opponent's going to have a moat, and you're going to be like, why didn't I put Reclamation Sage in my deck? But I think artifacts are much more prevalent.
This is the situation I envisioned.
Often there are decks where you just like, you want to have something in your deck to kill swords or GT or Batterskull. And having a 2/1 is a bit of a liability because lots of those matchups are Mana Dork matchups, and then you just have this 2/1 that ends up trading for a Mana Dork, so it just ends up sitting there, not attacking, not blocking. Whereas a 2/2 is actually much better in those matchups because it can attack into multiple 1/1s, and you don't feel bad trading your 2/2 that killed a sword for 2 1/1s.
I guess from my perspective, you probably want both. Is what I
sure,
what
but
I sort of think.
Often the aggressive decks sort of need all their creatures to be good more often, and like Manglehorn's static ability I think makes it better just to play out more often, like having artifacts come into play tapped. If somebody top decks a Mox, comes into play tapped, it's obviously has huge upside just being in play against Academy. Like lots of times when you have Rex Sage against Academy, you're sort of like wary of just Rex Saging a Signet. But I think Manglehorn, you just slam dunk that Signet, and then like all their other mana is stunted.
Well, it's interesting too. Against Timebolt, this card's very good as well, right? Because even if they have to like set up the situation where they play their untapper either as like it's not an artifact, or they have to like play the key the turn before and then play the Timebolt and like untap it and stuff, and it's just clunky and awkward.
Exactly. And it slows down the Tezzeret part as well. Mm-hmm. Or no, it doesn't.
But... No,
all right,
it doesn't.
I lied.
Yeah, it doesn't work on the Tezzeret part, but it is good. And this card, the other big thing about this card, and one of the reasons why it's certainly a staple, is like it's 2 and a green, right? It's like super playable. You can, it's not like 1 green or something like that.
Exactly.
Like this card's pretty easy to play, and again, it's an asymmetrical effect. It only affects your opponents. Your artifacts, so it'll come to play untapped.
I think it just like completely slam dunks 2 matchups, like Academy and Affinity.
Well,
like,
people used to be playing Molder Slug for Academy. Yeah, and the days of needing to play Molder Slug are probably
long gone. Thankfully,
you can just play this card now.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna try and speed up a little bit maybe because we've got like 50 cards.
Yeah.
Not
so
quite.
Moving on to solid playables, Hazoret the Fervent.
Yeah, this is the 5/4 haste.
Yeah.
For 4 mana.
Has an activated ability: 2 and a red, discard a card, dome your opponent for 2.
Yeah.
Each opponent for 2.
Yeah.
We only have 1 opponent in this format. I think this card's very good as well.
Yeah.
I think the condition is fairly easy to get to. I think by the time you have 4 mana in red aggressive decks, you shouldn't have very many cards left in hand.
Well, it's also just, it's free, right? Like, you probably playing just like a 4 mana, 5/4 haste indestructible is already like pretty decent. Like, obviously you need to only have one card in hand to be able to attack with it, but like most red decks are going to be in that situation anyway.
I agree.
I think this card is less good in some of the monster strategies that are going to have a bunch of removal in their hand, though, because it has the potential to just like not do anything against the control deck or something like that.
And I think that's the difference between this card and Ronis. I think it goes in like 1, maybe 2 decks, maybe a couple more niche decks.
Yeah.
But like it's very good in those decks, so it fits under solid playables.
Yep.
Next card we want to talk about is Liliana, Death's Majesty.
Correct.
Nice.
Jeremy's doing very well, by the way. We did not write down the full list, the full name
Definitely
of most of these cards.
That's why we're sort of stuttering. Yeah. I have a pretty good memory for names, luckily.
Yeah.
This card, I just think compared to the other 2 Planeswalkers, costs more, obviously. Potentially has the biggest effect with the minus reanimating a creature.
It was in the finals this week.
Yeah, very, very good effect. But I just think it's a little more niche than the other ones. Obviously, the other ones being able to cast for 3 mana is huge in Highlander.
Just 5 mana Planeswalker automatically is going to shut off a bunch of decks that might play this card.
Yeah, it'll see play, but not widespread play.
Yeah.
Vizier the Menagerie is the card that I've been testing, and I've seen a few other people play. It's the 4 toughness, I think, is super relevant.
It's a 3/4, right?
Yeah. And being able to get some card advantage in green is nice as well. Also, being able to cast any creature for any mana.
Yeah, that's actually huge.
Is very relevant and easily the most underrated text on that card.
Well, so Noel and I were talking the other day, and Noel messaged me being like, "Oh my god, I didn't read the 3rd line of text on this card." Like, he was just like ready to put it in his deck just as like a thing that let him play cards from the top of his deck and a 3/4. He didn't read the part about being able to play them for any color of mana. So
yeah, and this also the fact that you get to look at the top card and it's not revealed is very relevant because it gives you the information but not your opponent.
Yeah.
And anytime you get to work with more information than your opponent, you're
that's good.
Advantaged.
Yeah.
Have you considered putting this deck in your Abzan pod? Because then you could cast Kiki Jiki.
I've thought about it, but I don't think it's good.
All right. Next one is Commit to Memory. I love this card.
It's interesting because this is another one we don't agree on as much, but I think this card's good. I'm not sure I would have it as highly as you do.
I'm going to play it a lot. It's nuts in Academy strategies. Yeah. It's great in like blue-green ramp.
Yeah.
I think even some bigger mana control decks could play it.
One of the good things about it is that it is a bounce as opposed to a counter, which means that this card like is an answer to Thrun for blue decks. Like you can put Thrun when it's on the stack, 2 down,
wheel it away,
potentially.
It away.
Yeah. So like that's potentially like pretty good, pretty valuable.
Yeah, it's not a counter spell per se. It's like a Venser effect.
Yeah, but it's close enough to a counter spell, right? Because it still eats their draw step. Like
you're not down cards, and the fact that it's a bounce spell as well, so it deals with permanents on board.
Yeah, two down is actually pretty relevant. It gets put second from the top, so they draw a card and then they draw it, right?
Yeah.
In Highlander, that actually matters, right? Because we have a bunch of fetch lands in this format. We have a lot of tutors.
Yeah, so
a lot of the time,
respond to somebody fetching and just bury.
Like, well, but also even if like some aggressive player, like let's say you commit their 3-drop. And then they draw some 4 they want to play, but their 4th land is a fetch land. Do they now have to like kind of accept that they're going to shuffle away this other good card? Like that's just like you're putting like more like challenging decisions to your opponent, and anytime you can do that, it's like definitely helpful. All right, maybe you sold me. Maybe this card's better than
next one we want to talk about is Pull from Tomorrow.
I think this card is better than Blue Sun Zenith.
I think that's likely true.
The one awkward thing is that you can't target your opponent. And there are a bunch of Blue Sun decks that care about that. They want to be able to target their opponents.
Yeah, like High Tide, for example.
Yeah, like I'm not playing this card in High Tide, interestingly. I would play Brain Geyser before I played this card.
Definitely, because you just need to be able to target your opponent.
But I think in Blue-Red control, this card is nuts.
I agree, because often when you're casting a big X draw spell, you're going to draw some number of lands, so like you're virtually like discarding's free.
Yeah. The discard one is like a very minimal effect.
And you just want something to refill, and it being cheaper and instant speed is super nice.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's as you said, 1 less than you usually pay for instant speed wise, because like it's obviously comparable to Stroke of Genius and Blue Suns, where you have to pay 1 more mana, mm-hmm. so you're essentially coming out even on cards, mm-hmm. and like looting is much better than just not drawing a card. Next card we're talking about has seen some play already. I like it better than most people, is Combat Celebrant.
Did I tell you about the Combat Celebrant turn I saw?
Was it when Greg dirted Spencer?
That involved, yeah. There's a
Primeval Titan?
Yeah, there's a Primeval Titan in play. That card, it turns out pretty good when it gets to attacks.
Yeah. There's lots of cards that are good at attacking twice. Yeah. Which is why I think this card is actually good. It's a nutty threat against combo decks that aren't going to kill your creatures very often, because it represents a ton of damage, and it's once again a card that is nuts with equipment. Like getting to attack twice with a Jite, getting to attack twice with a sword.
Or grafted war gear, perhaps.
Or grafted war gear. Creatures that have attacks triggers, like it untaps all your mana dorks. Like, so you can like play creatures, then attack with this, exert it, all your mana dorks get untapped, you can cast more stuff second main. I just think there's a lot of utility in this card that people haven't necessarily explored. Yeah. Exactly. So a lot
of these cards are like monsters cards, eh? This card's also really good in the kind of red-green monster strategy.
I'm not positive. It's certainly alright in that deck. I just think you want some more robust threats in that deck typically, and like I think you want to be more aggressive with this card.
So what deck do you want to play it in?
Red-green aggro I'd play it in,
okay.
Especially the Mana Dark version. Like any lower to the ground, like Naya aggro I could see it in with all the like Wild Nicattles and Curt Apes and stuff. Pump spells. It's really, really good with pump spells because like you get to pump spell your creature in first combat and then attack with it again, and it's still bigger in second combat. Yeah. Yeah. So like red-white aggro. I could even see it in like a mono red that's more creature focused.
Do you think you would play it in a deck like Goblins, or does that deck care too much about its Goblin synergies?
I think you care too much about the Goblin synergies.
Yeah.
And like you're often not. Your creatures don't benefit that much from attacking twice. Like, lots of times you're making a lot of chump attacks.
Yeah.
In that deck, like it's not the worst card in that deck, but not the greatest, I don't think. Next card we want to talk about is Sweltering Suns. Just like a super value card. You can cycle it when it's bad. These effects are often liabilities to put in your deck, but necessary.
Yeah.
So the fact that you can cycle this one means it probably gets played over Anger of the Gods most of the time.
Yeah, it's close. Like, the exile clause on Anger comes up a fair amount.
It's quite often you're going to end up playing both.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that the nice thing about this one is that you get to, like, you certainly probably play it over a card like, Firespout, yeah, exactly. You probably played over Firespout. You get to play this card maybe over Pyroclasm even.
Sure.
It depends on how
just sort of
lets
you hedge a bit against the meta without getting punished too badly.
Yeah, I've also seen Jeskai players playing this card because it lets them play a Wrath that they don't have to commit to having in their hand in matchups where it's bad.
Exactly.
So like, you want to have this card against Goblins or some of the aggro decks, but if you end up against Control or something, you can just cycle it. And like, it's bad when you cycle it, obviously, like 3 mana.
But the thing is, most of the matchups where you want to cycle it are slower matchups.
Yeah, no, exactly. You have time to do it, so it's not the end of the world.
The next card we want to talk about is a card I'm also really excited about, is Cut to Ribbons.
Yeah, I think this card's gonna...
I think this card
lose me a bunch of games.
should see a lot of play.
Yeah.
1 mana more for a Flame Slash, not a big deal. I'm a huge fan of Vizier Mortars already.
People play Roast.
I think that card's underplayed. And this card is just like a Flame Slash that also just has like a win condition attached to it, and just gets to sit there in your graveyard and make your opponent potentially play badly because they're like, oh, there's that fireball in my opponent's graveyard, and can't afford to. It's like, yeah,
it's very good.
And quite often they'll forget about it, and then you just get to like make this weird attack, and then they'll be like,
I'm gonna lose.
What are you doing? I'll go to 5, and then you're just like ribbons you for 5, and you're just like, that attack was less weird than I thought it was.
Perhaps I underestimated how weird that attack was.
Yeah,
so yeah, I think that card's good. I think that it's a little awkward because I'm not sure what decks it fits in. Yeah,
I think Jund should always play it. I think black-red is an underexplored color combination, especially bigger black-red decks.
Interesting.
That's something I'm gonna work on later this year, I believe. It's on the short list. Long list.
Yeah, I was gonna say the short list is pretty long.
So I'm gonna play this card for sure. Next card we want to talk about, Prowling Serpapard, the Cat Snake.
Yeah, the Cat Snake. This card is really polarizing because it's either gonna be great or like bad.
I think it's fine or good.
When this card got spoiled initially in the sort of like Highlander Facebook group, people were talking about like, oh, this card's so nuts, and my like first comment was like, I will happily bolt this card. And part of that,
sure.
And I think that's for me the biggest issue with this card is that it's like this 3-mana threat that just gets lightning bolted.
It would have been much better as a 3/4 for sure.
Oh, infinitely better. Yeah.
But like there are sometimes you're gonna look at your like blue-white control opponent and just slam this.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh no.
Yeah.
And then they like
they're
are almost
they're on wraths or swords basically.
Exactly.
Yep. No, and the card's definitely good. Like, people should definitely play it. It's definitely going to get into decks.
And there are definitely times when you, like, get to look your opponent in the face and be like, I know you have a counter spell. You probably don't have removal spell up. This one. And I love doing that with Loxodon Smiter or Thrun. And your blue opponent's just sitting there with their 4 cards in hand, their blue mana untapped, and you're just like, let me just rain all over your parade, sir.
Then or commit your spell, and then you're like, oh no.
Yeah. Yeah, damn.
We have the answer now.
They got the tools.
But yeah, this is one of those cards that I think is it's a good card. It might be a card that gets cut from decks sometimes though. Like this is one of those meta choices.
That's the reason we put it into solid playables and not the staples.
Yeah, I agree. Like this is a card that's going to be in your deck a bunch of the time, but that I don't know that you should necessarily feel bad about cutting.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't play it all the time, but probably gets in most of the time.
Next is a card that near and dear to my heart. It is a black 2/1 for 1.
Yeah.
So it's recursive even. Yeah. So this is Dread Wanderer. Like Black just really likes these effects, and this card's really good with Gravecrawler in particular because they get each other or like one gets the other back, which is kind of nice. So there wasn't really another recursive zombie that you could get out of your graveyard super easily to go with Gravecrawler. Like there was Icarid, but that card was like pretty hard to play.
Awkward.
And like Bloodghast is not a zombie. So Dread Wanderer being a zombie matters a bunch. Honestly, like just more black 2/1s just really pushes.
It can block, which is relevant.
It is, yeah, that's true. But basically, just having more black 2/1s for 1 like really kind of pushes the envelope of like what this deck could do. We've seen people sort of play the like super aggressive.
Yeah, Nelson's sort of known for having success with the Sui black deck. More recently, Jason Jobin as well, who plays it with a green splash.
And also Mike Simpson's playing it with a white splash now too.
Yeah, that's true.
So there's sort of like people have played it, and like every time they get a new 1-drop, like the hands where you go 1-drop, 1-drop, 1-drop are almost always the best. Like where you play 1-drop on 1 and then 2 1-drops on 2.
It just like forces your opponent to have a very specific answer, or they're in big trouble.
It's just so much pressure, and then like they play a blocker, you kill it. Like it's just it's really powerful. So having more draws like that is great.
Another card I've seen some people testing, but others probably not on their radar, is Curator of Mysteries. It's the 4/4 Sphinx.
Yep. That
whenever you discard or cycle a card, you get to scry 1, and it cycles for a single blue mana, which is where I think most of its power lies. It's like, if you draw it in your opening hand, you're almost always cycling it.
If you draw it late in the game, it's a 4-mana 4/4.
It's a 4-mana 4/4 flyer, which is good at winning the game.
Yep.
So it blocks really well, which is, I think, excellent. It is a flyer, so good at attacking, it's super efficient and cycles, and has random upside. If your opponent starts attacking your hand, you get to scry, which is not irrelevant.
What do you think? What decks do you think play this card?
I think mid-range blue decks should play it, control decks should play it, any blue deck that plans on getting to 4 mana should probably play it.
Do you think it gets into Seinfeld?
No, it's a win condition.
Alright.
We
can't play those.
No.
Fair enough.
Doesn't actively stop your opponent from doing anything.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's too much something.
Yeah.
Next card I want to talk about, Glorybound Initiate. I have played this card in some test games, and it's been absolutely insane. It's a 3/1 for 2 that when you attack...
Often a 4/4.
Yeah, it attacks as a 4/4 lifelinker for 2 mana every other turn, which is real good. In some matchups, they must kill it or they can't possibly win.
Yep, Chris Sutherland played this card in Jeskai. It looks pretty good.
I think it's great. It's a little... its biggest downside is its frailty, obviously, but it's only 2 mana, so like...
Yeah, if your 2-drop is dying, like, to a 2-drop removal spell or something, you can't be that upset, right?
Yeah,
it's a little awkward. The other thing that's a little awkward is that this card is, like, less good against red than you probably want it to be as well, because it is a 3/1, so it's, like, pretty easy for them to...
It's really nice, though, because it forces them...
Yeah, to devote a burn spell to knock your face.
Yeah, especially and early on, so it likely eats their turn as well, as opposed to developing their board, which they could otherwise do.
Yeah.
So, and then just, like, kill it on their next turn, potentially get prowess triggers and stuff.
Yeah.
So
the next card we're going to talk about is
Channeler Initiate, the other Initiate. I think this card is really good in the monsters decks again. Just having a mana dork early that becomes a relevant threat later is awesome, and those decks that play like more lands than the aggro decks but still want mana dorks to accelerate into 4 and 5 drops.
Yeah.
This card fits that bill perfectly.
Yeah, and I mean, being a 3/4 eventually, an important thing to note about it is that like you can just float the mana on your end step if you want to. Like you don't actually have to be casting spells every time to grow this.
Exactly.
It can just grow if you need it to grow.
Yeah.
The next card we're talking about is Bone Picker. This card is another card for some of the more aggressive black decks. So this is the card that you can play. It's normally 3 and a black for a 3/2 with Death Touch and flying, but if a creature has died, it just costs 1 black.
Yeah.
And it turns out getting creatures to die in Highlander is not that hard.
No. No.
So this is another card that's probably pretty good in Suicide Black, for instance.
Especially since people are still in the habit of like waiting till your turn to cast removal spells.
Mm-hmm.
So you often be able to attack them. They're like, all right, didn't play anything first main. I'll bolt this card or Doomblade this one or go for the throat, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you're just like, all right, second main, I'll play Bone Picker and another thing.
Yeah, or the play I've seen happen a couple of times now, which looks totally disgusting, is snuff out your thing, plays Bone Picker plus 1 drop.
Oh yeah, that's pretty gross.
Yeah, just like kill your blocker, develop 5 power, 3 of its flying, go.
Yeah. Another sort of potentially undercosted big threat is Cryptic Serpent.
Yeah.
I'm actually not as high on this as some people are. I think most of the decks that want it are the sort of tempo decks that are, like, in theory want it, are tempo decks that want to play a threat and then protect it.
Yeah.
But I think this just doesn't come down fast enough for that strategy.
I agree as well. And the other thing that's really awkward with this card is that it's at odds with all the Delve cards, and I think the Delve cards are just better. Like, I'd just rather be casting Gurmag Angler and Tasigur and Murderous Cut than I would this card.
I agree.
Like, it doesn't have evasion. I think that if it had some kind of, like, even if it was an activated ability, I
agree. If you could pay 3 to make it unblockable,
or even like 5, I would even play. Like
sure.
Gear, it's like the Kaladesh one.
Gear Seeker Serpent.
Yeah, like if it had an effect to that effect, then maybe it gets in. But I think just being a 6/5, it's obviously good, and you can turn it on faster than you'd think. Like, you can often play it for 2 blue on like turn 4, but by turn 4 you really should have a threat developed and have attacked at least once.
Exactly.
From my perspective.
You want the game to have progressed a little more by that point.
It also incentivizes you to play cards like Thought Scour and Mental Note, which in a lot of the tempo decks are just pretty low impact. And
I don't know. I think you're incentivized to play those cards anyways with the Delve spells.
Yeah. And, I don't know.
And spells and cards like the next card we're talking about, Enigma Drake.
Yes.
I like this card on the other hand. It has evasion, and it has 4 toughness for only 3 mana.
Yeah, there was a similar...
Spellheart Chimera.
Yeah.
That one trades a point of toughness for trample.
It's much worse.
I think it's worse, but I still like that card.
It's just pretty... Like, 3 toughness is really the bar for a lot of things, right? Lots of removal spells hit 3. Definitely. Lots of the early flyers are 3s. For instance, like Restoration Angel, Delver of Secrets, now Bone Picker, though it has Death Touch, so I guess that's not relevant.
Yeah, but this card, its power is equal to the number of instants and sorceries in your graveyard, and I love pairing this card and Spellheart Chimera up with Runechander's Pike and just one-shotting somebody.
Yep, seems good.
Have done it several times.
Yep.
Next card we want to talk about is Cast Out. I think this card is immensely playable. It's got Flash. It's a 4-mana Oblivion Ring effect, or Banishing Light effect.
Banishing Light, it's better. You can't get blown out.
For those who are going to get technical, and it cycles for a single white.
Yeah, which is pretty important, I think.
Or when you don't want to land, when you're not getting to 4 right away.
Yeah.
Great card. Censor, another good card, I think. Force Spike cards are super polarizing in that they're often very good early and terrible late, and giving this card cycling for 1 mana makes it good all the time. That's all there is to say.
Yep.
Cycling lands, these cards are really good in slower decks because you often don't want to flood out, and guess what you want to do with your lands? Discard them to draw another card. Guess what cycling lands that you do? Discard your land to draw another card.
The other thing too that's pretty nice is that they are actual basic land types.
That's true.
So
fetchable.
They're fetchable, and for decks like High Tide that want to just have as many island swamps as they possibly can, you actually like maybe don't have to play Watery Grave anymore.
And Scape Shift as well.
Yeah, Scape Shift cares about it a lot too.
Getting more.
Yeah, I like
more mountains that are not basic mountains.
Yes, is nice, and like they're also just much better mountains to draw because you can discard them.
Definitely. Soulscar Mage. This one we disagree on again. This time
it's at the very bottom at the solid playables. I think it's a solid playable, and Jeremy does not.
Yeah, I just think this card is overrated for a couple reasons. People have been comparing it. The obvious comparison is to Monastery Swiftspear. I think Monastery Swiftspear having haste is hugely relevant. Likely gets, obviously gets one more attack in almost all the time, and I just think that makes that card so much better. I think that giving -1/-1 counters is rarely relevant, and I think prowess creatures in general, apart from like Monastery Mentor and Seeker of the Way, are largely overrated because I think you often don't want to play spells on your own turn. Even in burn, just having to throw like incinerates at their face as opposed to the next creature they could be playing, just puts you so far behind on tempo, and I've seen people lose games because of it.
So the reason I think this card is good is because it is a 1-drop in red that potentially has more than 1 power, and again in the same vein as the sort of mono black decks or the black decks that are splashing 1 color. Just being able to go like 1-drop into double 1-drop is really, really powerful, and I agree with what Jeremy says about like it having those downsides, but like the mono red decks are playing cards that like the 1-mana 1/1 that flips into a 3/2 if they don't cast a spell.
I haven't seen many of them play Reckless Wave
in a while. Okay, anyway, I just think the 1-drops are really powerful, and I think that the ceiling on this card is pretty high. Like it does potentially get to attack for like 3 or 4 on some turns. So I don't know.
True.
It's definitely a card that people are gonna play. It's possible people shouldn't play it as much as they do.
Yeah, that's all I think. It's not like stone unplayable. I just think it's likely not optimal.
Fair enough.
Now we're gonna move on to the niche or one archetype playables. We're gonna start with some more gods. I think we're gonna talk about Oketra first, the white god. I think she is underrated. I foresee myself playing this card, and I think this card is super, super good. It's nuts against control, nuts against mid-range, very good against aggro, fine against combo, and double strike is great with equipment.
Double strike is very good. My issue with this card is that I foresee it being a bit of a liability to turn on, because it requires you to be attacking with 3 creatures to attack, or does it require you just have?
You just need to have 3 other creatures.
Okay. It's like still a bit of a liability, but less so in that regard.
It's like against the Wrath decks, it's very good because it just enables you to like
stick around.
It's a mana sink.
So yeah, you just stick the threat.
Yeah.
Because like Heliod was close to playable, and this card is better than Heliod.
Certainly much better than Heliod.
Yeah, maybe you should play mono white control again.
Get out of my house. Yeah. Yeah, so I think this card is underplayable or underrated.
Will be
Will be underplayed.
Is a little unplayable.
Yeah, it's not the stone nuts. It's good in a couple decks, but I think it's going to be very good in those decks. Similarly, I have a similar viewpoint on Calfnet, except I think it is more meta dependent. I don't think you can play this card in a very aggressive meta, but I think in a slower meta, with maybe some combo thrown in, I think this card is very good.
I played this card in Standard, and I gotta say it felt pretty awful. But I could see it, obviously in Highlander, it's a different beast entirely.
I just think the
fact that it costs 3 mana is kind of nice. You can deploy it early, and if you're a control deck, it's like a threat you can play early in the game, and then you can kind of plan your whole game plan around having it in play.
Yeah.
Which is kind of nice. But I think that you shouldn't be planning to attack with it for a long time.
I know, yeah. I do think, though, that it's nice to be able to activate its ability and clock some decks.
Yeah, oh, yeah, no, certainly. And you certainly will clock some decks with people. But I think that,
like, if you stick this in a control mirror, I don't think you should necessarily sit back. I think, like, forcing them to have an answer to it is pretty good, because I think lots of decks don't have a lot of answers to these gods.
Yeah, that's fair.
Next card we want to talk about, Never to Return, sort of another card like Ruinous Path, which I've played before. I think this card is better. Instead of getting a 3/3 that's also a land that your opponent can kill, you get a 2/2 and you get to nug something from their bin, which is often relevant. And you get to split the mana up.
That's the other big thing.
Much better.
Yep. Just card's just good. Like,
yep.
It's certainly better than Ruinous Path.
Worse than Hero's Downfall, notably.
Yes.
Next card we want to talk about, Chefet Monitor. Likely only going to see play in like very dedicated ramp decks or Scape Shift.
Yeah. It is nuts in Scape Shift, though, probably.
Yeah, I think it's great in Scape Shift. It's a uncounterable 4-mana ramp spell that is card neutral.
Yeah.
So that's super relevant. And the land coming into play untapped, also relevant.
Potentially relevant, yeah.
Because like there are times when you're on 7, need a ramp spell that comes in untapped to be able to like
win the
21.
Game.
So that is relevant. Similarly, Vizier of Tumbling Sands likely only goes into Timebolt. I'm not sold on it, but Liam wanted to include it.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm not sold on it either, but it's worth noting that it's an uncounterable way to untap Timebolt once, and it also combos with Timebolt if you just put it into play.
Yeah.
So it's close. Like, I don't think this card's great, but I think that in decks that aren't Timebolt decks that aren't playing red, I don't think that you should play Captain of the Mists. I think you should play this card.
Yeah.
If you want an effect of that style.
That's fair. Next card we want to talk about, Angel of Sanctions. I think this card is tremendously overrated. I think paying 5 mana for a 3/4 flyer, it better be doing something real good, and I don't think an Oblivion Ring is going to cut it for me.
No, I think this card's not great either.
And the Bomb cost is 6.
Yeah.
5 and a white.
Might even be 7. No,
I think it's 5 and a white.
Yeah.
So that's also too high.
Yeah.
It's too easy to deal with. Doesn't win the game fast enough. Archangel of Thune, this is not.
Yeah, people will probably still play it.
Cruel Reality we wanted to discuss just because the effect is so powerful. If you're turbo ramping, maybe you can do it. I've played this card in Sealed and it was great in that format. But
in Team Sealed.
Yes.
When we gave you all the rares and removal so that you wouldn't die in the early game.
I did have all of the rares. I did play 7 of our 12 rares in my Sealed deck.
Yeah. I played 2 of the other ones.
Yep.
Trent played none of them.
Yeah, Trent's deck was insane, though.
Yeah.
He just played mono uncommons.
Yeah.
His deck could have barbecued either of ours.
Yeah.
Yeah, we won that Team Sealed.
We did.
It was very close, though.
Yeah.
I was about to say not close, but that just would have been
that would have been like a flagrant lie, yeah.
Yeah. So this card is incredibly powerful if you can not die and have it in play. That's pretty much all there is.
The simple explanation.
You should likely play the Abyss first.
Yeah, I agree.
Vizier of Many Faces. I think this card is underrated. It's just clone the first time around and then you get it again.
Just like getting this effect twice really kind of like pushes it over the top. Like, clone probably isn't playable in Highlander, but Phyrexian Metamorph is, and like it's like the mana difference that makes it playable. And I think getting to clone twice is also enough to push.
And it's also uncounterable the second time around, which
is super relevant.
Yeah. In like mid-range blue mirrors, like if your opponent sticks a good creature, you get to clone it. If they counter it, then you get to clone it uncounterably the next time and like at least even it up. And if you're the aggressor and you have the good creature, then you just get multiples of the good creature that is winning you the game, which is very, very good. There are some situations, obviously, where clones are not great, so I understand people's wariness with this card, but I think it's better than some other people do, certainly.
I agree.
Approach the Second Sun. I think this card is less of a joke than most people think. There are lots of ways to get lots of mana and draw lots of cards.
It's also just inevitability, right? Like, you can just like play not that many win conditions because the spell only has to resolve once. Like, it only has to resolve the second time. Even you can just jam it the first time, and then plan your whole game around resolving this spell the second time because it functionally reads you in the game. Yeah. So that's like not irrelevant as well.
So yeah, something to look out for. Champion of Ernest is a card I've heard a lot of people talk about. I'm not as high on it as some other people. I just think they're like, yeah, you cast it off a mana dork on turn 3, and then you have a bunch of huge fatties in your deck. And I'm like, I don't know what deck wants all of these things. Possibly some sort of natural order deck.
Yeah, I've heard people talking about it in Hoof, but the problem is,
Hoof doesn't have enough good targets to put in.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is that like, yeah, sure, if you get your Primeval Titan or whatever, it's great. But actually, putting your Crater Hoof Behemoth into play off this thing is like
pretty bad.
Yeah,
you've already attacked.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm just not sure where this card's gonna fit. It has a powerful effect.
Yeah.
I don't like that it's only a 3/3. Would have liked to see it a 3/4.
That's a common
commonplace
thing for us.
Yeah, such is life. Vizier of Remedies, this card goes into Sandra Bullock, and that's it. It's another Anafenza / Malira.
It's better than Anafenza the Foremost because it's not double white. That's what I would say.
I agree. Blood Rage Baller, this card potentially goes into some aggressive decks. Likely not, because it has 3 toughness, once again.
It has a pretty big drawback. Like, you don't get to structure your deck around discarding a card quite as well. Like, maybe, again, in this black-red deck you're talking about, it's possible.
Yeah.
But discarding a card and having it not be symmetrical, having it just be you discard a card is, like, a pretty real cost.
Next up is another card I think that is going to be underplayed a lot, is Dissenter's Deliverance. It's 1 in a green, destroy target artifact, cycling for a single green. I think this card is great.
Yep.
Not enough people are going to play it in their green base or the green controlled type decks.
The big thing too is that it is another basically free roll. Cycling cards are just so insane in Highlander, and there weren't that many really high power level ones because oftentimes the cycling cost was a little prohibitive.
Yeah.
And in this set we've just gotten a bunch of cards that have single colored mana cycling costs with powerful effects on them.
Actually, in the same vein, Forsake the Worldly should be here as well. I didn't include it in my list, but I think I'd play that card in blue-white control.
Yep.
You often want a disenchant. Disenchant is often in my plus 10 cards. If I had to play 110 cards, I'd likely play disenchant. And having it have an exile clause is super relevant as well. Kills Keranos, gets rid of stuff. Exiling and the cycling is obviously nuts too.
Yeah.
Next card we want to talk about, Dusk to Dawn. This card is pretty niche, but I can see some potential blowouts coming from this card for sure.
Yeah.
Aristocrats, it's a Wrath. It's Plague Wind plus Rally the Ancestors, basically.
Yeah.
Slam dunking this into Aristocrats.
Yeah.
Could potentially see play in White Weenie as well.
Yeah, there are a couple. I think Adam Thorne tried it in his White Weenie deck, I think. I don't remember if I saw that for sure or not.
It's possibly a little meta dependent in that deck. You want to see a bunch of green decks running around.
Yeah, you want to make sure you're killing.
It's kind of nice because it's another out to True Name because it kills 3 and greater.
Yeah,
so
that's
something I have to keep in mind if you have a lot of True Names running around. Possibly this is a consideration. Next card is another
super French one. Yeah, it's maybe you played to mind. Yeah, you played maybe in blue green ramp. I know Jonah was trying to justify playing it in Scape Shift, and he cut it, and he ended up playing it, but I think he ended up feeling the card he cut to play it was better than it. That he just
I think it's rarely better than Cultivate Kadama's Reach for.
Yeah, I don't think it's better than those cards unless you're I think in the Rogue Scape Shift deck where you're trying to play a mid range game, it's maybe a little bit better. I think his logic was well, I like having ramp spells. And I also wouldn't mind having a card like Opportunity in my deck, or it's not even Opportunity, it's Inspiration for 6 mana.
Yeah,
the
sorcery.
No, it's instant.
Is it instant?
It's instant, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's not the stone worst, it's slightly better, but it's a lot of mana to leave out. The number of times that you're just going to have 6 mana at end of turn is not super high, but it's a free upside, right? So the question is is it worth playing 3 mana for this rampant growth in order to have that upside later on? I think Jonah decided that it's close. Basically, that might be, but that it's
I'm
not...
much more on board with this card now that I know the 6 mana part is instant.
Mind is an instant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think most of the other ones, the backside is sorcery.
Yeah.
So
this is one of the exceptions.
Why I think it's a sorcery.
The next card is one that I'm going to try and play, and Jared's going to try and stop me from playing.
Yeah.
It's Samut. I forget what the epithet is. It's the last of the resistors or something. I don't know.
That's not quite right.
No, I know. But anyway, this is the 5 mana red green. With a white activated ability, Flash, Double Strike, Haste, give all your other creatures haste cards.
Vigilance. It also has Vigilance.
Does it even have Vigilance?
I lost this card in draft,
I see.
Recently.
That card's nuts. Anyway, it has a lot of keywords. It has Flash, but it is a 3/4 for 5, and it's probably not that good, but I'm going to try and play it anyway.
Yeah, it's just too expensive and doesn't do enough, and gets blocked. If it had Trample, I'd be on board, but...
Yeah.
It just gets blocked and costs 5.
That's fair. The next card is Neheb.
I think this card's good. It's the Stone Nuts against combo. If you stick it against control, it's also the Stone Nuts. It's potentially very good in creature matchups because it can get First Strike. Does a bunch of damage.
What's his power and toughness?
it's a 2/2, but if you have one or less cards in hand, it's a 4/2.
With first strike?
It always has first strike, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. That's good.
So it's like almost always gets to attack because it has first strike.
Yeah.
Because then you just get to kill things with burn spells.
Yep, fair enough.
And when it attacks, each player discards a card, which is why it's great against control and combo, because you're going to empty your hand much faster than they will.
Yeah, it's like a real threat.
Yeah. The last one I want to talk about is Honored Crop Captain. It's the 3/2 that whenever you attack, your team gets +1/+0. It's just a solid card.
Yeah, like this is just probably a card that...
3/2 for 2 with Battle Cries. Better than a Corner Paladin, which sometimes gets played. So
yep.
Better
and
than
then,
that. There is one card in the last section.
Yeah, the possible but pretty rare plan.
I retitled this one from, like, incorrect cards to play. The one card we have in this section is Glorious End. I know some people love the Final Fortune, Last Chance, Warrior's Oath type effects.
This card is not them.
Well, it is them.
No, it's not. It just ends the turn. It doesn't actually give you an extra turn, right? You have to cast it on your opponent's turn in order to get an extra turn.
Sure.
It's just
basically
like
the same thing.
It is, but it's just like way less... Well, in some ways it's more versatile too, actually. You get to cast it in response to Wrath.
Yeah, that's pretty hot.
Yeah.
You can potentially, like, tap them out. You can, like, get a card out, like, exile a card from their hand, potentially.
Yeah.
But if they just, like, pass and do nothing, it feels kind of bad.
Yeah, that's the big thing, is that I think this card ends up sitting in your hand, and you're, like, waiting to get them, and it costs 3 mana. So it's, like, it's not the easiest thing.
Yeah, you're likely supposed to cast it in their upkeep most of the time.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't know. I think these cards are all unplayable. I'm going to play this card in one deck. It's going to be in Hive Mind. And mine will never resolve.
I see.
Theirs will resolve.
Right, and then they'll lose.
On their precisely.
On their end step, theoretically.
Yeah.
Seems good.
Yeah. Precisely. They have to pay all these packs in their upkeep, then they're going to lose on their end step. How do they win?
Yeah.
They just lose. There's only losing.
Fair enough. Right. Well, so that's been the set review. If there are other cards you're curious or interested in, feel free to comment or tweet at us. Tweeting at us is the much more effective way to get a response.
Or email us.
Yeah.
I've set up the email once again, so perfect. I'm receiving those.
Yeah. So, we hope you enjoyed the set review. And, this is Liam and Jeremy. And we'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.